The security camera footage showed everything, but I wasn't ready for what came next. Even now, months later, I can still see those grainy images in my mind, the ones I wish I could forget, but somehow help me understand the full scope of what had been happening right under my nose. My name is Christopher, and I'm a game developer working for a mid-sized studio in Trenton, New Jersey. For the past 4 years, I'd been building what I genuinely believed was a solid, unshakable marriage with Sydney, a talented graphic designer who freelanced from our comfortable 2-bedroom apartment overlooking the Delaware River. We met at a gaming convention in Philadelphia where she was showcasing innovative UI concepts for mobile games, and I fell hard, really hard, for her creative energy, sharp wit, and the way she could make me laugh even during the most stressful crunch periods. Our orange tabby cat, Rusty, completed our little family when we adopted him from a local shelter 2 years ago. He was a scraggly kitten then, all ears and attitude, but Sydney had insisted we take him home. Summer in New Jersey brings that thick, oppressive humidity that makes you want to stay indoors with the AC running full blast, which is exactly what I'd been doing lately. The studio was in serious crunch mode for our latest release, a complex sci-fi strategy game called Nebula Dominion that had consumed not just my days but my nights and weekends for months on end. The pressure was intense. Our publisher had moved up the deadline, and as senior developer, I felt responsible for making sure we hit our targets. Sydney seemed understanding at first, even supportive. She'd bring me coffee while I worked late into the night, occasionally massaging my shoulders when she noticed me hunched over my keyboard for hours. But something shifted around June, subtle at first, then increasingly obvious to anyone paying attention. She became distant, not in the dramatic, door-slamming way you see in movies, but subtle, insidious. She'd glance at her phone and smile, a particular kind of smile I'd never seen before, soft and secret, then quickly pocket it when she noticed me looking. She started taking calls in the bathroom with the shower running, her voice muffled but audibly animated in a way our conversations hadn't been in weeks. When I'd walk into a room, she'd minimize windows on her laptop a bit too quickly, that telltale flash of panic crossing her face before she'd compose herself and ask about my day with forced cheerfulness. The genuine enthusiasm she used to have when discussing her design projects, the way she'd excitedly show me mock-ups and ask for my opinion, completely evaporated. Our conversations became purely transactional. Bills that needed paying, groceries we were running low on, whose turn it was to clean Rusty's increasingly neglected litter box. I told myself it was stress, both hers and mine. She'd landed a major contract with a regional retail chain, tasked with completely redesigning their brand identity, logo, website, in-store signage, everything. It was her biggest project to date, potentially career-defining. Maybe she was just intensely focused on work, like I was with the game launch. Maybe we were just two people passing each other in the hallway of our own life, too busy to really connect. These things happen, I reasoned. Every marriage has rough patches. But then came that Tuesday in mid-July, when she announced she needed to visit her client's headquarters in Cherry Hill to present initial concepts in person. Just a day trip, she said casually over breakfast, spooning Greek yogurt into her mouth while scrolling through her phone. She'd be back by evening, definitely before dinner. I was neck-deep in debugging some particularly nasty collision detection issues that had our QA team pulling their hair out, and I barely looked up when she kissed my cheek goodbye, her lips cool and quick against my skin. She returned at 11 p.m., flushed and apologetic, claiming the meeting had run incredibly long. They'd loved her concepts so much they'd wanted to workshop additional ideas on the spot. And then traffic on Route 295 had been absolutely terrible due to an accident. I was still at my computer, bleary-eyed and frustrated, and I just nodded. But then I noticed she'd changed clothes. The white blouse with blue pinstripes she'd worn that morning was different from the soft pink sweater she had on now. When I pointed this out, genuinely confused, she laughed nervously and said she'd spilled coffee all over herself at lunch and had to buy something quick at the mall near the client's office. The explanation was reasonable. Perfectly reasonable. Everything had a reasonable explanation. That was the problem. It was all too neat, too prepared. I started paying attention. Really paying attention, the way I'd learned to debug code by examining every variable, every function call, every seemingly insignificant detail. Sydney had never been much for shopping at the Quaker Bridge Mall. She'd always complained it was too crowded, too commercial, preferring smaller boutiques in Princeton or ordering online. But suddenly she was making trips there every week. Sometimes twice a week. Always alone. always coming back later than expected with minimal shopping bags considering the hours spent away, and when I'd ask what she'd bought, her answers were vague. Just browsed mostly, or couldn't find anything I liked. The developer in me recognized a pattern emerging. Data points that didn't align with expected behavior. Variables producing unexpected outputs. A system that claimed to be functioning normally, but was clearly exhibiting anomalous behavior under the hood. One evening, while she showered, singing to herself, which she hadn't done in months, I checked her phone. I'm not proud of it, not at all. It violated a trust we'd built, crossed a line I'd always thought I'd never approach. But something in my gut screamed that I needed to know, that ignoring this feeling would be worse than the guilt of looking. She'd been careful, almost professionally careful. Most messages were deleted. Her call log was clean. But I found one text thread she'd forgotten to clear completely, probably in a rush. Can't wait to see you Thursday. Same place. The contact name was just R. No photo, no additional information. Counting the hours, Sydney had replied, followed by a heart eyes emoji I'd never, not once in 4 years, seen her use with me. My hands shook as I put the phone back exactly where I'd found it, making sure the screen timeout matched, that it was face down just as she'd left it. Rusty rubbed against my leg, meowing insistently for his dinner, completely oblivious to the fact that my entire world had just tilted sideways, that the foundation I'd been standing on had revealed itself to be sand. Thursday. Tomorrow. The Quaker Bridge Mall again, according to the notation on our shared calendar on the fridge where she'd written mall, personal shopping, in her neat handwriting. I called in sick to work the next morning, something I rarely did even during actual illness. I'd worked through flu, through migraines, through everything because the team depended on me. My manager sounded surprised, but told me to rest up. I watched Sydney prepare to leave with more care than usual, as if I were watching a stranger perform a ritual. She wore a sundress I'd never seen before, floral and summery, and flattering in a way that suggested it had been purchased specifically for someone's approval. She'd actually taken time to style her hair in loose waves, and she applied makeup with extra attention, foundation, concealer, that particular shade of lipstick she usually reserved for special occasions. When she left, calling out a cheerful goodbye, I waited exactly 5 minutes, counting them down on my watch, before following in my old Honda Civic, staying several cars back, my heart pounding so hard I thought I might pass out. The mall parking lot was massive, a sea of cars glinting in the July sun, and I kept my distance as Sydney walked inside through the main entrance, her sundress swaying, her confident stride suggesting she knew exactly where she was going. I expected her to meet someone immediately, to rush into waiting arms, but instead she wandered through a few stores, Gap, Sephora, a bookstore, checking her phone repeatedly, her body language betraying nervous anticipation. I stayed far back, pretending to browse sunglasses at a kiosk while keeping her in my peripheral vision, my sunglasses hiding the fact that I wasn't actually looking at merchandise. Then she lit up, genuinely lit up, her whole face transforming in a way I hadn't seen in months. A man approached her from the direction of the food court. Tall, athletic build, carefully groomed beard, wearing expensive-looking casual clothes that screamed disposable income. They didn't immediately touch, maintaining a careful distance, but the way they looked at each other told me everything I needed to know. There was hunger there, anticipation, the particular electricity of people who've been counting down minutes until they can be together. After a moment of conversation, smiling and laughing, they started walking together toward the south exit, close but not touching, not yet. I followed them to the parking garage, my stomach churning with each step, where they got into a silver Audi sedan parked in a corner spot away from other vehicles. Through my car window, using my phone's zoom, I watched them embrace immediately once the doors closed, saw him cup her face, saw her lean into him with an eagerness that made me want to vomit. My hands gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles went white as I watched them drive away together, heading toward Route 1, probably to some hotel where they'd spent previous afternoons. I sat there in my car for maybe 20 minutes, possibly longer, trying to process what I'd just witnessed with my own eyes. The theoretical betrayal had become concrete, real, undeniable. I felt like I was floating above my own body, watching myself sit there, paralyzed and pathetic. But watching wasn't enough. I needed proof, yes, documentation that would stand up in divorce proceedings. But I also needed to understand who this person was, how deep this went, whether this was a brief fling or something that threatened to completely destroy the life we'd built together. Over the next 2 weeks, I became someone I didn't recognize when I looked in the mirror. I tracked Sydney's movements through location sharing on our phones, a feature she'd forgotten we'd enabled years ago during a cross-country road trip, when we'd wanted to make sure we could find each other if we got separated. The app showed me every movement, every stop, every deviation from her stated plans. I noted every client meeting and shopping trip in a detailed log. I created a spreadsheet, because that's what I do. I organize data, I find patterns, I create systems to understand chaos. Monday through Friday, the data was damning. She met this man at least 3 times a week, sometimes 4, always between noon and 5 p.m., always at the mall or locations nearby. I hired a guy, not a professional detective, just someone named Oscar from a gaming forum, who did photography on the side, and owed me a significant favor for some coding help I'd provided on his portfolio website. He was discreet, asked minimal questions when I explained what I needed, and he didn't judge. The pictures came back sharp and clear, professional quality, timestamps embedded, GPS coordinates logged, angles that showed them holding hands while walking, kissing near the parking garage elevator with her hand on his chest, looking at each other like teenagers experiencing first love, completely absorbed in their own bubble. But I still didn't know who he was, this man who'd inserted himself into my marriage. That's when I made a decision that crossed a line I'd never thought I'd approach, that pushed me into territory I'd only read about. Sydney had started keeping a secondary phone hidden in her gym bag, the black duffel she never actually took to any gym despite her claims of starting a new workout routine. One night, around 2 a.m., while she slept deeply beside me, breathing softly and peacefully while I lay there wide awake, I carefully extracted the phone, my hands trembling, my heart pounding so loud I was certain it would wake her. His name was Ruben. He worked in pharmaceutical sales for a major company and lived in Princeton in what appeared from his social media to be a nice condo. Their messages went back 4 months, starting in March. They'd actually met when she was legitimately shopping at the mall. That much was true, which somehow made it worse. He'd approached her at the Starbucks inside, complimented her design portfolio she'd been reviewing on her tablet while waiting for her latte, and apparently swept her off her feet with charm and attention I'd been too buried in work to provide. The messages were intimate in ways that made me physically ill, that made me want to throw the phone against the wall. Plans for afternoons in hotel rooms with detailed descriptions of what they'd done and wanted to do. Discussions about leaving their respective partners. He had a girlfriend named Melinda living with him, apparently unaware of his extracurricular activities. Dreams about a future together, about traveling to places Sydney, and I had always talked about visiting. She wrote things to him she'd once written to me during our early days of dating, recycled intimacies that felt like violations of our history. But here's what struck me as genuinely odd as I read through hundreds of messages. Despite all the passion and heat in those messages, there was also persistent doubt on Sydney's part. She kept asking for reassurance in ways that seemed almost desperate. "Are you sure about us?" she'd write. "This feels so complicated and scary. Promise me this is real and not just excitement." Ruben's responses were smooth, practiced, almost formulaic. Too practiced. The kind of responses someone gives when they're enjoying the thrill and attention, but not actually planning for anything long-term or serious, just saying whatever keeps the situation going. I photographed every message, every photo they'd exchanged, every plan they'd made, using my phone to document everything while making sure not to mark anything as read. Then I carefully returned the phone to exactly where I'd found it, buried under her yoga mat and resistance bands she'd never used. The old me would have confronted Sydney immediately. Yelled, thrown things, demanded answers, forced a dramatic scene full of tears and accusations. But something fundamental had changed in me during those weeks of surveillance and discovery. I'd watched the woman I loved betray me methodically and repeatedly, and I'd learned to be methodical myself. I'd learned patience. I'd learned that information was power, and that timing was everything. I created a burner email account through a VPN, making sure nothing could be traced back to me, and found Melinda through Ruben's social media. She posted frequently, apparently unaware her boyfriend was cheating. I sent her a simple message with 3 attachments: the clearest photos of Ruben and Sydney together, screenshots of particularly damning messages with timestamps, and a brief note. "Thought you should know who your boyfriend spends his afternoons with. You deserve better than this." Then I waited, continuing my normal routine, acting like nothing had changed. 2 days later, Sydney came home from a shopping trip, visibly shaken, her world clearly having just exploded. Her eyes were red and swollen, mascara smudged down her cheeks, and her hands trembled as she dropped her purse by the door. She went straight to the bathroom without speaking to me, without even acknowledging my presence. I heard her on her hidden phone, voice cracking with desperation. "Ruben, please just talk to me. I don't understand why you're doing this. Melinda knows? How does she know? What did you tell her?" Apparently, from what I could piece together from Sydney's increasingly frantic messages over the following days, Melinda had confronted Ruben with everything I'd sent, photos, messages, all of it. According to Sydney's panicked messages I monitored late at night, Ruben had completely shut down and gone into self-preservation mode. Blocked Sydney on everything: phone, text, social media, email. Refused to answer calls, sent her voicemails straight to spam. His girlfriend had given him an ultimatum, and he'd chosen the path of least resistance, cutting off the affair entirely and begging Melinda for forgiveness, promising it had meant nothing, playing the remorseful boyfriend role. Sydney was devastated, genuinely destroyed. The next few days, she went through the motions of normal life while clearly falling apart inside, barely holding it together. She'd check that hidden phone obsessively every few minutes, hoping for a message that never came, her face falling each time she saw an empty screen. She'd disappear into the bathroom to cry, muffling the sounds with running water. Emerging with red eyes, she tried to hide behind sunglasses. She picked at her food, barely eating. And I pretended to notice nothing significant, asking with feigned concern if she was feeling okay, suggesting maybe she was working too hard or coming down with something, offering to make her tea. The cruel irony wasn't lost on me, cutting deeper each time I saw her check her phone with desperate hope. She'd betrayed me completely, shattered our marriage, and yet her pain at being abandoned by her affair partner was genuine and raw. She'd blown up her life for someone who'd discarded her the moment things got complicated, who'd proven he'd never valued her beyond the excitement and ego boost she provided. But I wasn't done. Not yet. I scheduled a dinner reservation at Amici Milano, an upscale Italian restaurant in downtown Trenton we'd gone to for our anniversary. Sydney seemed genuinely surprised when I suggested it, caught off guard, but she agreed after a moment's hesitation. The restaurant was elegant, romantic even, with soft jazz playing and candlelight casting warm shadows across crisp white linens. We ordered wine, a Sangiovese the sommelier recommended. Sydney was trying hard to act normal, to engage in conversation about neutral topics, but I could see the enormous effort it took. She kept glancing at her phone placed next to her plate, still hoping for that message from Ruben that would never come. "You seem distracted," I said after the appetizers arrived. "Just work stress," she replied, the same lie she'd been using for months, delivered with less conviction each time. "The retail project is demanding. Sydney, we need to talk about something important." Her face went pale instantly, color draining like someone had opened a valve. For a moment, I saw real fear flash in her eyes, the fear of someone who knows their secrets are about to be exposed. I pulled out my tablet from the bag I'd brought, casual but deliberate, and slid it across the table. On the screen was a compilation I'd spent hours making. Photos arranged chronologically, message screenshots with the most damning passages highlighted, a timeline showing the progression of the affair with dates and locations meticulously documented. "I know about Ruben. I know everything." She stared at the screen, and I watched every emotion cross her face in rapid succession: shock, horror, shame, panic, despair. "Christopher, I can explain. I don't need explanations. I don't need apologies. I don't need you to tell me it didn't mean anything, or that you were confused, or that I wasn't paying enough attention." I kept my voice level, quiet enough that nearby tables couldn't hear, but firm enough that she understood this wasn't a discussion. "I need you to understand that I know everything. When it started, how often you met, where you went, what you told each other, your plans to eventually leave me for him. I also need you to know that Ruben received a visit from his girlfriend exactly 2 weeks ago with similar information. That's why he cut you off completely, why he blocked you, why he won't respond to your messages. That was me." I made sure Melinda knew exactly what her boyfriend was doing. Sydney's hands trembled violently as she reached for her wine glass, nearly knocking it over. "You've been spying on me? For how long?" "Monitoring the situation," I corrected calmly, as if we were discussing a work project. "Making informed decisions based on available data. It's what I do for a living. I identify problems, I gather information, I find solutions. You made this a problem that needed solving." "Christopher, how could you?" she started, her voice rising slightly before she caught herself, aware of our public setting. We need to talk about this properly, we need." "I'm not finished," I interrupted, holding up my hand. Tomorrow morning, a friend of mine named Jim, he's a divorce attorney I've retained, will be contacting you about divorce proceedings. I've already moved my important belongings out of the apartment to a storage unit I rented last week. Clothes, my computer, personal items, everything I'll need. I'll be staying with Oscar temporarily, while we sort out the legal details. You can keep the apartment through the end of the lease, which is 3 months from now. After that, you'll need to find somewhere else to live. I've already spoken to the landlord about not renewing. Christopher, please, we can talk about this. Tears were streaming down her face now, her voice breaking. I made a mistake, a terrible mistake, but we can work through this. We can go to counseling. The cat stays with me, I continued, ignoring her pleas. You never really bonded with Rusty anyway. He barely tolerates you. I'll pick him up tomorrow along with his things. I stood up, pulling out my wallet and leaving 5 $20 bills on the table to more than cover our barely touched expensive meal and leave a generous tip for our server who'd been nothing but professional. I'm not interested in revenge beyond this. I'm not going to tell your family the details or blast this on social media or try to sabotage your career. But our marriage is over completely and permanently, and I wanted you to know that I know exactly why. I wanted you to sit across from me one last time and realize that you threw away something real, something solid in partnership and history, for someone who didn't even fight to keep you when things got difficult, who dropped you instantly to save himself. I left her sitting there, tears streaming freely now, drawing concerned glances from the couple at the next table and our worried server. I walked out into the warm summer night, got in my car, and drove to Oscar's apartment where Rusty was waiting, having been smuggled out earlier that day. The next few weeks were bureaucratic hell, lawyers, endless paperwork, dividing assets that weren't really worth much anyway since we'd both been focused on careers rather than accumulating wealth. Sydney tried calling repeatedly, sent long rambling text messages at all hours that I read but didn't respond to, even showed up at Oscar's apartment once before I told her through the door that any communication needed to go through Jim. She wanted to explain, wanted closure, wanted understanding, wanted me to hear her side of the story. But I'd already found my closure that night at the restaurant, watching her realize that I'd maintained complete control of the situation while she'd been falling apart. Jim was efficient and professional, exactly what I needed. Since we'd only been married 4 years and had minimal shared assets, no house, no kids, no major investments, the divorce moved relatively quickly by New Jersey standards. Sydney didn't contest anything Jim proposed. She signed whatever he put in front of her, her signature shaky but present on every document. Maybe she felt too guilty to fight, or maybe she was just exhausted and wanted it over. Oscar let me crash on his couch longer than I probably should have, never complaining even when my stuff took over his living room, and Rusty adapted to the new living arrangement better than I did, establishing territorial dominance over Oscar's apartment within days. I buried myself in work, putting in even longer hours than before. 6 months later, the divorce finalized and official, I moved into a small house with a fenced yard in Hamilton. Nothing fancy, but it was mine. Rusty loved it, spending hours watching birds and squirrels through the windows, chattering at them with predatory interest he'd never act on. The studio promoted me to lead developer on a new ambitious RPG project. I heard through mutual acquaintances, who somehow always know everything, that Sydney never got back together with Ruben. He'd completely blocked that chapter of his life, focusing on rebuilding trust with Melinda. Last I heard through the grapevine, they were engaged and planning a wedding. Sydney apparently tried various dating apps but kept comparing everyone unfavorably to what she'd lost, both with Ruben and, ironically, with me. The stable, reliable husband she'd taken for granted while chasing excitement. Some evenings, when I'm debugging particularly frustrating code with Rusty curled up warm and purring beside me on the couch, I think about that security camera footage I never actually mentioned to Sydney. The one in our apartment building hallway that I'd hacked into early in my investigation, using skills I'd developed for work but never thought I'd use this way. The one that showed Sydney and Ruben making out passionately against our apartment door one afternoon when I'd told her I'd be working late, his hands in her hair, her leg wrapped around his, completely oblivious to the camera recording everything. The sheer audacity of it, the disrespect of bringing the affair literally to our doorstep, should have made me angrier than anything else. But instead, it had shown me exactly who I'd married, who Sydney really was beneath the surface I'd loved. Someone who could compartmentalize betrayal so completely, so thoroughly, that she'd bring it to our literal doorstep without a second thought. Someone who could kiss another man where I might have seen them, risk everything for a thrill. The revenge, I realized, wasn't in exposing her to friends and family, or posting evidence on social media, or trying to damage her professionally. It wasn't in taking money we didn't have or property that didn't matter. It was in showing her precisely how disposable she'd become to the man she'd risked everything for, how quickly he'd dropped her when consequences arrived. It was in making her sit across from me at that restaurant and realize that I'd known everything, controlled the ending completely, and was walking away with my dignity intact while she had nothing. No marriage, no affair, no future she'd imagined. She'd wanted passion and excitement, the thrill of something forbidden and dangerous. She'd found it, briefly, with someone who saw her as entertainment rather than a true partner. And when I'd systematically removed myself from the equation, when I'd ensured Reuben would abandon her, she'd discovered that he had never intended to catch her when she fell, had never planned to actually leave his own situation for her. I didn't destroy Sydney's life. She'd done that herself with every choice she made, every lie she told, every afternoon spent in hotel rooms with someone else. I just made sure she understood the consequences completely, fully, and undeniably before I closed that chapter forever and walked away into whatever came next. Thank you for watching the video to the end. YouTube may no longer suggest my channel to you, so subscribe to it to receive new interesting stories. You will also help the channel grow and improve the quality of its content. A playlist with other interesting stories that you can listen to is now displayed on the screen. You can also write in the comments what stories you would like to see on the channel.